Well, there's been a popular saying lately that says, "If you could see it, you could be it." And I can say for many of the things that I've done, there were no role models in the past for me. A person of color, a woman, an engineer. I think if you're waiting for a role model so that you can, and I totally understand if you could see it, you could be it, because you should capitalize on those role models. You should say, "Hey, that person could do it, I can do it." But you should also say, I don't see anybody around me that has done this. So I want to be that person that a next generation sees and says, "Well, she did it, I could do it," or "He did it, I could do it."
You're listening to Know It, Live It. I'm your host, Laura Hanson Brexa. Each week, I have an insightful conversation with a fascinating person who shares their life mission, determination, passion, principle, or spiritual journey. Today, I am talking to Alma Grocki. I have heard of Admiral Grocki for years. She was my husband's mentor in the U.S. Navy Reserve. I had the privilege to see that mentoring in action this past March. While in Hawaii, she and her husband and my husband, Captain Brexa, and I met for dinner. We walked my husband through a decision tree. And then we forgot all about the man as we started chatting over our mutual love of chocolate. By the way, I have a box of C's in the fridge right now. Thank you, Alma Grocki, for talking with me today. I'm impressed with your energy and interest, your career, your passion for your heritage and history. There are a lot of things you know are right for you and you really live. I want to have a conversation about how you know what you know what you want to live, and then live it with such focus to achieve it. Tell me more about learning what you want to know and then how you achieve it and helping others do the same.
I think that I'm generally a lazy person, and I'm always looking for a better way to do something that'll be faster and easier. But I also know what kinds of things I think I want to do, or I'm interested in something. And I don't usually think about, is this going to be hard? I just think about, wow, how can I do that? What do I need to do that? If it's something I need to purchase, if it's something a skill I need to learn. And that's kind of what I do. I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm an engineer by degree, a mechanical engineer, but I also make jewelry and do calligraphy. So I think that left brain, right brain thing is kind of messed up in my head. Anyway, so but I enjoy all different kinds of things, and I'm always looking for something that excites me, something that is interesting to me, or I would like to learn more about it.
You find something that catches your attention.
And then I think about, well, how do they do that? I don't take a lot of classes as far as art or even read a lot of books. I'll just try something, and usually it's not that hard. And then I'll improve upon it. If I really want to, quote unquote, do it the right way, I may take a class just so that I find out how it's supposed to be done as opposed to how I'm doing it. But other than that, I just try things. People say, well, how do you do that? How did you learn how to do that? I just tried it. When I was a kid, I wanted fancy Christmas cards, so I started doing calligraphy. And then I got different pens and I tried different techniques. But really, it was because I wanted fancy Christmas cards.
Now, mechanical engineering, how did you get into that? That you can't fake that. You got to be pretty precise with that.
I like taking things apart. I want to know how they work. A roommate I had and I were in a lunchroom once, and the guy came to fill the soda machine. And he opened it, and I was so excited because I got to see how this thing worked. I mean, I wanted to know how it is when you put your money in, the machine knows exactly how much you put in, and it gives you the thing you're supposed to get. And there's all kinds of different ways I found out. But that's the engineering part where I'm always interested in how something works. And I could say that with my family as well, when my boys were growing up, they're both engineers. My husband's also an engineer. We didn't throw things away when they broke. We took them apart to see how they worked. Now, we didn't necessarily put them back together, but we did take them apart. So yeah, I'm always interested in how something happens, how it works.
So curiosity.
Yes, absolutely.
Curiosity. When it got hard, why not give up?
Well, I'm also a stubborn person, and I think everybody in my family will tell you that. And sometimes all it takes is for somebody to say, "I'm not sure you could do that," or "That's never been done before." And that to me is like a personal challenge. And again, my mind goes to, why can't it be done? What's so hard that a regular person couldn't figure it out. And so I think being stubborn has driven me in many cases to try something that I normally wouldn't do or to persevere in something that might be easy enough to stop. And I think they call that, redirecting your energy now, but I think it's just stubbornness.
So let's say you had a young woman come to you and say, I just don't know what to want to do with my life. I really want to go into this field. It's always kind of been a field that men achieve in. And I just don't think I can do it. What would you tell her?
Well, I think that this happened. I've gone to schools, elementary, intermediate, high schools, talk to kids, and I still do that a lot. But sometimes youth don't understand what they like, how they can make that into a career. They can actually make money at it. So, for instance, I had a girl that came up to me and she said, "I really love chemistry, but I don't want to be a chemistry teacher." Okay, so her idea was, if I like chemistry, I have to be a chemistry teacher. And I said to her, "Do you use makeup?" And she said, "Well, of course." And I said, That's all chemicals." So it was a different way of looking at something as opposed to what she knew of, okay, this is a career, but how do I fit into the mold of what this does? And I think to some degree that's how a lot of inventions happen. People say, "I want this to happen," or "I want to do this," or "This is an accident. What can I do with the pieces that I've now got that was an accident," or whatever. Young woman saying, "This is a man's world." Well, in the time that I've been alive, and that's a long time because I was born last century, right? But in the time I've been alive, things have changed. Things have changed so much so that it's not clearly a man's world or a woman's world. Sure, there are a lot of uh, careers where because you're a man or because you're a woman, you can probably do better at or excel, or it's easier to excel. But that doesn't mean it's closed to the other gender. Going both ways. There were misconceptions a long time ago about how women were better at one job because of their empathy or their caring nature or their loving. But there are men that are like that as well, and they can excel in those jobs. The other side is these jobs are for men because they may be dirty or hot or you're uncomfortable, it's not glamorous, you're tromping around. And for me, I was the closest thing to a boy my father got. I had an older sister, so I was the boy. And wearing steel toe boots with a hard hat, tromping around the shipyard, which is what I did in my Navy career, sounded fine to me because you can wipe your hands on your clothes. I mean, if they get dirty, you don't have to worry about high heels and nylons or anything like that. So for me, the career that I chose and the kinds of things I do are things I'm interested in, and also things that go with what I would like to do. And I don't really think about the gender issue. Now, I've had to deal with that in my career, but going into the career, I didn't think about it. And once I did have to think about it, I thought, okay, so is being a man going to help me do my job better? Is it easier if I was a man? Well, it was easier because it was a male dominated career field, submarine repair and maintenance. But that didn't mean there weren't any restrictions like you had to be so tall or you had to weigh so much or you had to be so strong and there are some careers that are like that. You have to have those certain minimum abilities. And in the careers that I wanted to, there wasn't. It's just that not many women had expressed an interest in the past. That didn't mean that I couldn't do it or people, after me couldn't do it. I was actually told a couple times that because it was submarines, and this is before women were on submarines, that it would be better if a man was doing my job. And I said, well, because he could carry this or he could do that. And you look around and there's no real physical requirements. As a matter of fact, there were some people, some males that were slighter in stature than me. And at the time I was doing this, I could have probably lifted more than they could. And so for me, I wasn't going to get into an argument with that person. It was just a, file for future reference. This is how this person thinks about things. Not that I have to prove them wrong, but I got to go do my job the very best way I can. And if I can't lift that 100-pound whatever, okay, so maybe I'm going to be smart about it and find another way to get it done. That I didn't have to do it, but it still got done. And so that's what I was looking at.
I love that. Can I go back to that thing where you said file in the future? That's just the way that person thinks. I want to
Right.
talk about that. So you said, I'm not going to argue with the person who's kind of in your way, but you filed away for the future. That's just the way that person thinks. Tell me how that helps with leadership, because that's a powerful lesson.
When I say file for future reference, you just make a note, a mental note that this person has some, and we all do, some prejudices or preconceived ideas that may not be correct. Now, I'm not going to go out there and shatter them and do a frontal assault and a head-on collision, but I'm going to make it a point that every time I could do something that might challenge his preconception, that I'm going to do it. And I may or may not, open with it. But it's not just a file for future reference. It's a file for future reference, and then think of what can I do to help him change his mind. Because, like I said, we all have prejudices. It's, the result of us growing up and our experiences. And maybe he just he hadn't had an experience where a woman could do something that he thought they couldn't. So, okay. So, I'm not going to argue with him about it, but I am going to remember that that's his preconception, and then figure out what I need to do to maybe nudge him in towards the middle, nudge him towards the other side or a different view, or at least make him question whether or not that preconception is correct.
I think that's such a wonderful part of leadership, because you're recognizing it's a teaching opportunity, not a
Yes,
challenging
absolutely.
opportunity, because rarely are you
Right.
going to get anywhere by challenging someone who just needs to learn and who says he's not
And there
teachable.
are situations, well, yeah, there are situations where you give them a lot of leeway, you give them an opportunity to learn, and they're not teachable, like you're saying, at that point, then you just do what you need to do to get your work done. And I think people will find that if they have preconceptions or prejudices that they refuse to change, that they will end up limiting themselves and what they can do and who they can trust or use to get things done.
And this is applicable not just jobs. This is volunteer work. This
Absolutely.
is working if you have to work with the same teller at your bank. I mean, this is anytime you're working with a human being on a consistent basis. And that's how
Right,
you want to be treated. If you were just ignorant of something, you wouldn't want something to yell at you. You'd want time to learn and grow, because you just may not know. Just may not know.
right. You may not have had that experience, and then if somebody presents you with an opposing view, then it's an opportunity if you're open-minded enough to learn from that, and, I think that's great if you could do it.
And you're still being someone's helping you save face.
Right, exactly, and having been growing up in Hawaii, saving face is a huge, huge, tenet of how we socially interact here. Just like family, ohana is very big here. It's an island mentality. It's a small island. That's why we don't honk on the road, because you honk and you're probably gonna end up seeing that person that weekend at your mother's best friend's cousin's brother's house for a party, and then they'll remember you're the one that honked at them, so you just don't do
There's a saying, always be nice to people you'll never know when you'll need them. And then
it.
there's my
Right,
grandmother's saying was, always be kind to people you never want to add to their misery, and everyone has misery. You mentioned how you shouldn't be limited just because no one's ever done it before. Tell me more about that.
well, there's been a popular saying lately that says, "If you could see it, you could be it," and I can say for many of the things that I've done, there were no role models in the past for me. A person of color, a woman, an engineer, there weren't any role models. I think if you're waiting for a role model so that you can, and I totally understand if you could see it, you can be it, because you should capitalize on those role models. You should say, hey, that person could do it, I can do it. But you should also say, I don't see anybody around me that has done this. So I want to be that person that a next generation sees and says, well, she did it, I could do it, or he did it, I could do it. Because we're breaking so many of the preconceived notions and the rules, if you will, about who could do what. I didn't have any role models, but I wasn't really looking for role models. I just know what I wanted to do, and I was trying to figure out a way to get to do it. And that's all there was to it. And so don't limit yourself by saying, well, it's never been done before. You be the one that steps out and be that role model for the next generation. And with all the good and bad that goes with that, but then you'll learn and you can teach someone else and they can follow in your footsteps and maybe not have to go through all the tough things that you went through.
There's a lot of tough stuff. Speaking of tough stuff, and you mentioned you had children. You've had this career as an
Yes.
engineer. You were in the Navy. Tell me about how you balanced all that, because that's some crazy stuff.
So a lot of people ask me that. I spent 35 years in the Navy. I raised two sons, and they also went into the Navy. My husband was a captain and submarine commander in the Navy. He had his own submarine. And so people say, well, how do you do that? How can you do all those things? Is it a career or a family? And I always tell people, it's not that you can't have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And what that means is you have to decide what your priorities are at the time and then choose to go down the path of that priority. Now, that priority could change. It should change over time. For instance, when my kids were very little, I wanted to stay home with them. And so I worked from home and I did jobs that were easy for me to be around when they were there. And of course, I was on active duty and then I went reserve to be able to do that. And also my partner, my husband had to be agreeable to this. He had to take up the slack when I went on reserve duty and I couldn't be around, just like I took up the slack when he deployed on his submarine. So it was a partnership. But at that time, my career took a back seat to raising my family. And as the kids got older, I discovered they don't need me as much as they used to when they were little. And so I could venture out more. I could go back on active duty, which is what I did. I could work more out of the house than I did before. And then that started building. And of course, when they started driving, that was the best. They could get wherever they were going by themselves and still leaned on my husband heavily, like he leaned on me to fill in the gaps to make sure there was always someone with the kids, someone interested in doing the things they were doing. But my priorities changed. So my career became almost as important as my family. And I, had to allocate time. So my priorities changed. And then when the kids were out of the house and had grown up and were off to college, then my priorities changed again. And then it was my career. And I could fully do that and I could jump in with both feet and spend the time and energy I needed on that. But these things are not irreversible. You think, well, I want to do this, and then you realize you're starting down that road and realize, oh, that I'm not comfortable with that. And you never want to make a decision and going into it, knowing you're going to resent that. So if you say, I want to focus on my family, and then you're a stay-at-home parent, and then you realize, boy, I'm really not happy doing this. You can change that priority. You can change your percentages that you're doing different things because you don't want to resent that. You don't want to put on your kids, well, it was because of you that I couldn't have my full career or whatever. That's not fair to them. They didn't ask for that. But it would be better to just rearrange your priorities and then find a way to be comfortable with what you've decided. And that's why I said it's not that you can't have it all. You just not be able to have it all at once.
Very, very true. For men or women, it doesn't matter your gender. We forget that there are men that probably would like to stay home.
That's right. Well, until they do, and then they find out how hard it is. Then they come to work to get rest.
I stayed at home with my children and it is a job, but I don't know anything other
It
jobs.
is.
I can't compare them. Speaking of which, I think top tier leaders in business get paid a lot because they make difficult choices. I'm of the opinion that you can't put real compensation package together for motherhood because the risk of failure is so high and the consequences of that failure are great. What's your take on that?
I think people have always said there's no how-to manual when you become a parent. I mean, there's a lot of books out there, but it's all different for different people and different families and different situations. But the decisions are based on perhaps how you were raised and your experiences. And so you do the best you can. And I was very surprised a few years ago talking to my kids and saying, I look back now and think of all the mistakes I made and how I could have done something better or I could have done something different. And both of them in separate conversations said, Mom, we realize you were doing the best you could at the time with your energy and the other things you had going on and what you knew. You did the very best you could. And we think we turned out okay. I said, well, great. Yeah, I guess I'll agree with that.
I'll
But it
take
is,
that.
if you, yeah, I'll take that. If you, there's not really a price industry. The people at the very top get paid a lot because they do make really hard decisions that impact a lot of people, that impact a lot of money. And so they have a wider perspective. And I learned that when I got higher up in rank in the Navy, what you think as a junior officer about how the Navy runs itself and you think, why can't they fix this or that? And then you get more senior and you have more of a perspective. It's not as black and white as you think it is. It's a lot of gray and it's a lot of personal decisions that have to be made. And then you realize that you have to have more information, not information that you would dole out to everybody at the lowest levels, but you'd have to have more information to make these more informed decisions. But at the lower levels, they sound like really dumb decisions. And I think it's sort of the same way with kids. Kids may think at the time, why did you not allow me to go do that? And you have your reasons, and maybe you can talk to them about them, but maybe it's just something you keep to yourself and you try to groom them and get them to be good people in the world and good contributing people in the world. And as they grow older, their perspective changes. They have more experiences. They see how difficult it is. It's not black and white. Do this, it's good. Do that, it's bad. It's not that clear cut. And
No,
so they understand that. And just like when you become a more senior officer in the Navy, you have a bigger, wider perspective. You have more experiences. You understand why some of those decisions were made way back then. And I think that's what happened with my kids. They understand better why my husband and I made the decisions we did. And if that's not the case, then that is what I'm going with because that's the best explanation I could get.
feel like now, speaking of decision making and the gray areas and how you know things that no one else would know, gut feeling, or the little bits of information you get someone that you may not be able to tell anybody because it's confidential or top secret, or things that you know from past experience that you can't even explain, but you just know all that kind of stuff that goes in decision making. What is your decision making process? And are they different with different things?
They are different with different things. Sometimes it's as easy as getting a piece of paper out and putting the pluses and minuses and drawing a line down the middle and looking at them and making an evaluation. And that's, I would say, those are probably for the easier things because it's more clear cut. Should I go on this trip? How much will it cost? How much time will it take? What will I miss if? That kind of thing. But there are other decisions that are much bigger with more impact. How many people am I going to impact? Negatively, positively, how much is this going to cost the government or the company, or what kind of financial impact? And then you try to do the right thing. Okay, so you take all this information, and the first thing you think about is what is the right thing to do? Not the easiest, not the fastest. What is the right thing? And sometimes you can do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Maybe it's a shade of what was right. And if it's absolute, then yes, a lot of people would get hurt. So you say, okay, again, not black and white, but a shade of gray. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do the far end of the spectrum. I'll do something closer to the center because it'll negatively affect less people. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. So my decision making process, a lot of things are very easy. They're technical. You make the decision. Okay, that's easy now. But the hardest ones are the ones that are not technical, the ones that are involve a lot of people, feelings, um, maybe some financial issues, and then you have to weigh what's right. And I'm a pretty firm believer in what's right is right. However, what's right for you might not be what's right for the bigger population. And so that's something that I think sometimes people forget. They do what's right for them, and they can walk away and say, "Boy, I feel good about that because that was the right thing for me." But if it impacts other people, then you have to take that into account. And I think sometimes that part of it, that part of the equation's forgotten, that they have to take into account negative impacts on other people and how their decisions make that happen.
Yeah, I can see that, especially in history when you look back. I think sometimes people forget the research part. They forget to get the information in the first place, or they don't know who to
Right.
ask who has the information. Do you have a process for those decisions that are complicated but have to be made fast?
Well, one of the things about being a leader or a good leader is recognizing your own limitations. Okay. So if I have to make a quick decision, I'm going to gather around me all the people that can input into that decision quickly, that have the information, that have the experience more than I do. And I want to hear what they have to say. What I don't want to do is gather people around me that are all going to say the same thing. I need somebody giving me the devil's advocate, somebody saying, no, because of this. And so I have to be able to get as full a picture as I can in the time that I have to make that decision. Very often, and this is one of the things people forget, if they make a decision their own without being able to gather information from people that should know or have more information than you do, that's a mistake. If I have the time to gather people that have that experience and information, that's what I'll do. If I don't have the time, then I will make a decision based on what I know with what I have. And it might be the wrong decision, but if that's what I know and that's what I've got to work with, that's the best I can make at the time. And I think people need to understand that if you can take the time to get more information, including reaching out to people that have that and saying, I don't know enough. I need you to help me. That's one of the basic things about being a leader is recognizing your own limitations and what you don't know. If you have the time to do that, then you should. If you don't, then you have to make a decision based on what you know at the time and to the best of your ability.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I wondered how that was done. In genealogy work, when you have information, sometimes I call it the best conclusion, best on the best evidence available.
Right. So people think, well, I don't have all the information I need, so I'm not going to make a decision at all. That in itself is a decision because not making a decision also has an impact.
So, who's in your tribe? You mentioned your husband, who's been a fantastic support to you. You mentioned that at our dinner, and your kids who have understood you. Who else is in your tribe that's supported you in being able to live what you know and figure out what you know and supported you in your curiosity? And you've mentioned your father who let you be who you were and grow up being your true self and not put you in pinafores when you didn't feel like wearing them.
Well, I think certainly both my parents, they had a apartment building. My dad raised the house that we had and built an apartment building because he always wanted to make sure that my mom would have additional income, even if he passed away, which he did in 2000. We lived in that apartment. It was a small place. It couldn't have pets or anything, but there were a lot of repairs that needed to happen. And so I was the assistant. I carried the tool bag. And so I learned a lot of things about plumbing and electrical and sheetrock and tiling that kind of piqued my interest in those things. I knew I wasn't skilled enough and I really didn't want to do that for a living, but I was able to speak to some degree about processes and materials and that, just went along with him. But what he kinds of things he really taught me were he worked at the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard for 39 years. And in the summer, before they had all the security gates, I used to go with him when school's out just for something to do. And that was my first introduction to the Navy and the shipyard. And for every ship I visited, he bought me an ice cream cone. So I went on a lot of ships. But he also gave me these little nuggets of information, things like if you ever tell a chief or a foreman how to do his job, he says, I'll be the first to kick your butt. These guys have been doing this for years, decades. And he said, we see a lot of young officers come in and they think they know it. They know it all because they've got that certificate, that diploma now, and they dig themselves a hole. And he says, we try to help them out, but they don't want help. So we have to let them go. And eventually they got to reach out for help. And he said, don't be one of those people. When you first come into some place, just listen, sit and listen and learn. And then you can start asking questions and then you can start changing things. So I think those kinds of little bits of information from his work and his job and his life were important. And so I learned a lot just for he was kind of a quiet guy, but I learned a lot from him just in watching how he handled people. And so I think my tribe, even though, the extended family was all here in Hawaii, closest to, of course, my mom and dad and my sister, she was very different from me. And that was a good lesson in how people can be very different, nature versus nurture, very different likes and dislikes and skill sets. So I think that, and of course, my husband, was supporting me in what I wanted to do. Sometimes it's pretty crazy. I have failed retirement. I'm on 8 nonprofit boards, and I work part-time at the new dry dock at the shipyard. And he supports me because I could not do those things if he didn't support what I was doing in time and energy and proofreading and, that kind of thing for me. And of course, my kids taught me all kinds of things as a parent, mostly patience, which I'm still not very good at, and resilience. And I think friends in the Navy throughout my time in the Navy, I learned, if you're willing to learn from people, younger, older, experienced in different ways than you are, I think if you are willing to learn, there's so much more you could do and grow. And I learned from, my sailors and my peers and even the guys and superiors above me, just watching them leadership situations, people comfortable enough to tell me I was wrong or how I should be thinking about something differently. And that was sort of my goal. I wanted to be a person that people could come to and say, here's my input, and I think you're going the wrong way, and here's why. And they would be comfortable telling me that. And, I would welcome that. And at the end of the day, I got paid the big bucks to make a decision. So if it was counter to their suggestions or recommendations, I try to let them know why I did that because, like I said, I might have a different perspective. I knew more information, but I always wanted to welcome those inputs. And I think that kind of tribe of people around you is essential to have. And very many of them became friends of mine. And so they started off as colleagues and became friends. But I think it's important to take on board anybody in it that you interact with that can teach you something, whether it's a thought, a perspective, actual hands-on skill, a way of looking at something, all these kinds of different things. And I think those are the people throughout my life and my career that were my tribe.
So I love that you can take feedback. Not a lot of people can do that. And I'm very impressed that you can be humble and keep learning. That curiosity opens you up to listen to other people. I think that's quite admirable, if I may praise you for just a moment.
Thank you. But I think what people have to realize, they may be smart in one aspect of their life, but they may have no clue on another aspect of their life that somebody else is coming in behind them to make sure it happens because they obviously have a shortfall in knowledge. So you could be really brilliant in one sector of information or how to do things, math and science. You could be brilliant in that. But if you can't spell, I mean, it's a different skill set, or you can't paint a picture or make a drawing. And you have to respect I think the skill sets of these diverse people. There are things that people can do that I cannot do, and I respect them for that. But then they can't do some of the things that I can do, and hopefully they respect me for that. But if we had one person that could do everything, that would be a wonder, I think. And I don't know of anybody who does that, who can do that. So you sort of just have to recognize that yes, you have to know what your strengths are, but like I said, you have to know your own limitations and weaknesses, and allow people to help you with that.
You do have to know your own limitations. And speaking of limitations and achieving and leading and knowing who you can ask for help and being open to feedback, is there a point in leading and projects where you have to say, okay, this is as good as going to get. It's time to stop. In making your jewelry or in your great boards where I'm sure there's projects and programs you're helping with. Is there a point when you got a
Right.
goal, but you're like, we're not going to
Yep.
meet that. It's time to cut. I'm sure there's a saying.
Absolutely.
Tell me.
There is a saying. It's called polishing the cannonball. So if you think about what that means, it's if you're going to use a cannonball in a battle, polishing the cannonball, is it going to make it more effective? Is it going to make it more efficient? And so that's the term, polishing the cannonball, where you're going above and beyond and overboard past really what you need to do to make the decision or move ahead. And again, choosing to not move at a certain point is also making a decision, and there'll be fallout from that as well. So yes, there's oftentimes, and you have to recognize that as a leader, you have to put some kind of a limit on, okay, discussion's great. I want to hear all the different views. Okay, anybody else? I've heard as much as I can, my brain is full. And so we have to make a decision, because if we don't, then there's going to be negative consequences to that. And yes, there are always that kind of time. And the saying is polishing the cannonball, when you're going above and beyond and you're trying to get more information and more information, or more ideas, or what more something, and you're now going into diminishing returns.
Just got to stop. Done.
Yep, just gotta stop. Yep.
It's gonna be as good as it's gonna get. You're not gonna get to the end. Time to
Right.
be finished. Good. Now I want to talk to you about something. I want you to tell me about the museum that you work with. Give me a little bit of information.
Okay.
About the museum.
Well, I'm on the board of the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, which is on Ford Island, which has its challenges because it's on a base. And as is the battleship Missouri. I'm also on that board, and that's a museum ship as well. Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum is actually the only aviation battlefield in our country because we were lucky enough to not be attacked many times. We haven't fought two wars on our own soil. Uh, that those hangars were there on December 7th when World War II started for the United States. And so we still have bullet holes in the windows, only collection of all of the Japanese aircraft that were involved in that attack on Pearl Harbor in the world. And we've acquired those aircraft through, fundraising, but we also have a very robust education program. Something on the order of 4,000 kids a year come for classes or summer camps, or we started a new one called Pathways, where we combined with the Department of Education of Hawaii so that kids could go to school during the day, and in the afternoon, several days a week, they come to the museum and they get training on how to become a pilot or a mechanic, because those are equally as important to have the mechanics fix the planes. And when they graduate from this program, they'll have that certificate, either a pilot certificate or one in A&P is what it's called, for maintenance. So that museum, we do a lot. Obviously, we're trying to tell the history, and through artifacts, the history of aviation in the Pacific, mostly World War II, but now we're branching out to some of the other world conflicts we've been in: Korean War, Vietnam, the Gulf War. And we have lots and lots of planes and helicopters. We have a Blue Angels jet. We have a Russian MiG. We have a South Korean jet. And the Blue Angels jet is one that was actually flown by our brand new CEO that we just got about 3 months ago. He was a Blue Angels pilot, and he actually flew that jet. So it's that full circle kind of thing coming around. But the big issue is education. We really want to educate people, and especially youth, in the principles of flight. And it's not all about being a pilot or a mechanic. We want them to also know the history, the World War II history of what our country went through, and the people that helped us along the way to win that conflict, win that war. But then what we've done since then, which is equally important. We just celebrated the 80th commemoration of the end of World War II. And since the end of World War II, we've had 80 years of peace. And of course, Japan, who was our enemy in that war, is one of our greatest allies now. I put up an exhibit for the 80th called the Sadako Sasaki Peace Crane exhibit. And these are the origami cranes that Sadako made. She was 2 years old when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and she died at the age of 12 from radiation poisoning. And in her lifetime, she folded 1,000 of these origami cranes, and her wish was to get cured. And that wish did not come true, but it was a symbol of peace that has gone all over the world. In our exhibit, we had cranes folded by students in Ukraine, in Iraq, all the countries that signed the Instruments of Surrender, Japan, and many of the local schools. And it's something that the youth can do. They write little messages in their language, and those cranes go around the world in exhibits. And it is something that they can do towards their little contribution towards peace. And the fact that we have them from so many different countries is just amazing. These kids are so anxious to have a role. What can they do? How can they help move our world, not their country only, but our world, towards a more peaceful situation? And it's really kind of cool that, they do that. So that's what the Aviation Museum is about. And then, of course, the Battleship Missouri, we have the beginning at the end of the war. The beginning is the USS Arizona, and she rests with her 1,177 sailors that were killed under the Arizona Memorial. But then the end of the war is Missouri, where the Instruments of Surrender were signed in Tokyo Bay. And then, so the beginning and the end of the war right here in Pearl Harbor. And it's just an amazing, amazing ship on the Capital Projects Committee. And so we replaced all the teak deck on the main deck, which is incredible if you could think about that. Very expensive, but it'll last for decades now. So that kind of thing, we try to promote the history of the ship, because she served in 3 wars: World War II, Korea, and the Gulf War. And so there's 3 generations of sailors on that ship, and now she resides in the harbor here. So those are 2 of the museums that I'm on the boards for, and trying to, and it's not just, people, visitors that come, or tourists, I want to get a lot of our local people involved in knowing their history of the island here. It's kind of like being in a place like Washington, D.C., where all the museums are there, and you say, yeah, I'll go next week. I'll go next week. My aunt hadn't been to the Arizona Memorial until she was about 65. And it was right in the backyard. It's just right there. I'll go next week. So I got her on board, and it's a sobering memorial to see what the people, the greatest generation, did and were willing to do and were able to do with their lives. And lives were lost, and the country really mobilized. If you look at the Arizona Memorial, you'll see that it's kind of it's like a long white rectangle that's up on the ends and down in the middle, and that's to symbolize how the United States was so high at the beginning in the early 40s, and then we were bombed, and that was a low point in the war. But then the country came together to raise itself up, and that's where we are now, at the high point again. And so it's very symbolic. There's all kinds of symbology in the memorial, but
I've been
those are
there and
the those are the two museums.
I've been there and seen the oil.
Yeah. You talk about the oil. The Arizona had just been refueled with ammunition and oil and gas right before the attack. And so the ship loses a gallon of oil a day that bubbles up to the surface, and you can see the sheen on the water. That 84 years of 1 gallon a day, because she sank on December 7th. There's 84 years of 1 gallon a day. This oil's been coming up, and there's still enough in the ship for another 66 years. So if you can fathom that, a gallon, that's how much they had in the ship when she sank. And of course, divers go down and make sure that the ship is still, the integrity of the bulkheads are still good, so that we won't have big spill in the harbor. But that's incredible if you think about those numbers and how many gallons that is.
Incredible. And the teamwork and the leadership to make those ships, to put all that together.
Right.
It's astronomical that we work together as a nation to put that all together, the rationing, everything. You can't even start listing things.
Right.
It would take pages and pages. And of course, our naval personnel, and thank you for your service.
I tell people that you were worth it. That's why I did it.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with me about leadership and about making decisions and living what you know and making the right decisions and leading youth? I believe you said your husband has been doing Boy Scouts for some time. Is that correct?
Right. And he's a golf coach at the local high school for 15 years, and he runs the White State Prayer Breakfast. So he's very involved in those kinds of things. But somebody has to stay home and not be crazy like me. So he's the one that does that. So he supports it. And of course, my mom is 97 and she lives at home with me. So he helps with that as well. She lived through the war, and my dad as well. Yeah, he was on the roof of his house watching the planes go by on December 7th and looking up at the big round symbol on the wing saying, boy, that looks like a Japanese plane. And the only reason he got down off the roof is because he started getting strafed. So he was in a work study program where he worked in the shipyard in the afternoon and went to school during the day. My mom, talks about the victory gardens they had and how they saved tin foil and scrap metal and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And she worked in the pineapple fields because a lot of the men had to go to war. And I don't know if that's considered a rosy, but she certainly, a lot of the kids picked up where there was a shortage of people that could do that work. And I think that was the very first indication that maybe we as a country, had the wrong idea about what gender you had to be to do a certain job, because half the population are women. And at the time, women were assigned to certain roles, teachers and nurses, which they're very, very good at. When all the men went to war of a certain age, it was quickly realized that somebody has to backfill them in these jobs that were traditionally male. And what are we going to do? It's not like we could use kids or import them from another country to work. And so you use the other 50% of your population, and the women stepped up and were able to do the jobs. And I think that was the first indication that we're only using half our resources, and we need to rethink the boundaries we put on who can do what. And I think that's probably the last message I'd like to leave, is that you're only limited by yourself and what you think you can and cannot do. If you're interested in doing something, do a little research, talk to somebody who does it, see if that's really something you want to do, or is just sounds like something you want to do, but find out, get a little information. And if you're not sure what you want to do, sit by yourself for a few minutes and just think about what it is you enjoy doing. And remember that what you enjoy doing as a hobby may not be what you would enjoy doing for a living and making money. Like, I love to eat chocolate. If I had to eat chocolate for a living, that might be hard. I'm willing to try, but that's the kind of thing, making jewelry for a hobby is great. If I had to sell the pieces and market them and worry about my income made based on that, may not be so much fun anymore. And so think about what you like to do. Think about what you're good at. Everybody has skill sets. Everybody has things that they know how to do that are better than other people. You just have to figure out what that is for yourself and how you can make a living doing that. But don't limit yourself. You're the only person that's going to do that. And if you have to be the first person in your family, in your culture that has ever done this before, then be that first person, the person that other generations look at and say, they were able to do it, so I can do it too.
Well, thank you very much, Alma Grocki. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us on Know It, Live It. Visit knowitliveit.net for the latest scoop, recaps, and more. Remember to subscribe to this podcast so you'll never miss an episode with a fascinating person who live what they know.